Welcome to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. My name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Our objective is to enthuse, inspire, energize, and empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes here in BW and beyond. We do so by inviting these entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs into our makeshift studio. Sometimes we call them to the restaurant, sometimes we go to our studio, and we ask them to share their experiential knowledge, their experiences and their expertise. And we ask them as many questions as we can, aimed at empowering you also as a viewer. Hi, dear viewer, dear listener. My name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Welcome once again to yet another wonderful, powerful, impactful episode of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. We do our best every single time to bring you life-changing information. And this time I have a performance coach, no less. I've invited Mr. Max Mosiakgabo to join us. And as usual, I like my guests to do the introductory part. Would you let the viewer know who you are and share a little bit of your background, sir?
Gladly. Thank you, Mr. Mogobe. My name is Max Mosiakgabo, currently the Managing Director for Franklin Covey and also Managing Consultant for HROD Africa. And then, of course, also coach. So I wear many hats. But today, the exciting bit is to focus on a very powerful conversation around personal growth.
Tell them, because we're going to talk about how to fuel personal growth. But before I go there, tell them about Franklin Covey, because to me, I'm very fixated on Covey. I've read the 7 Habits.
Yes.
I've also read the 8th Habit of Highly Effective People. It's really powerful, body of work that he's left for the world.
Precisely.
And now you are at the heart of it. You're the one who's carrying the message, if I'm not mistaken, Botswana and in Southern Africa.
Precisely more in Botswana. So Franklin Covey really is targeting individual effectiveness, team effectiveness, and organizational effectiveness. And this is based on the philosophy of Franklin Covey, where he says...
You mean Steve Covey?
Steve Covey, sorry. Where he says the critical piece is leaving the human being in a better state than you find them. So solutions that we sell and position for corporates really addresses those issues that look into personal effectiveness as well as organizational effectiveness.
Yes, thank you very much for that introduction. Today we're going to talk about fear and faith in terms of how it impacts and fuels personal growth.
Precisely.
Basically, we're going to talk about how to fuel, personal growth. It's a very important aspect for any entrepreneur to appreciate and to understand. Could you please define the topic and explain its importance?
It was a very interesting invitation when he came from you and said, talk about a topic that is really central to your place. Key to that is 2 contrarian ideologies. The first one is faith, and the other one is fear. And when I introspected, you realize that the 2 sit on one type of coins. So they are the same size of a coin. Fear, on one hand, can be debilitating, depending, and it mostly sits within our brains. It's a creation of a situation where you've sensed defeat, you're not able to execute, you're not able to achieve goals, etc. Faith, on the other hand, creates an optimistic point where you say, despite all that is impossible seemingly, you have an expectation that things would get better.
It's a bit like hope.
Precisely. Hope and belief.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, fear has often been described as false evidence appearing real. And I've had others even getting even fancier and say phantasmagorical evidence appearing real.
Yes.
Never mind the fact that phantasmagorical doesn't start with an F. But that is, you get the point, that it's supposed to be an imposter. What are your findings and what is your basic philosophy about fear in that regard?
In the same light, Mr. Mogobe, we have observed that fear has got another meaning. Face everything and rise, or fear everything and run.
Wow.
So those are the 2 exciting meeting points in saying, when you face everything, you rise. And this is where your faculties kick in to say, it's not just about survival, it's about thriving. So that's the critical.
So you can either face everything and rise, and then or face everything and run. And for purposes of success, I mean, my audience is largely entrepreneurs. What is the sort of mental orientation that you want them to adopt?
Face everything and rise. Because through that, your ingenious emerges. You find yourself looking for solutions. Innovation is at it's at maximum. All that needs to be done is presented before you. Strategies emerge, and you are more energized to actually face the challenges, etc. So the face everything and rise really talks to that point. And they say you shouldn't run away from fear. You should grow from fear.
That's wonderful. And obviously, as somebody who holds workshops and makes these presentations in front of people, there are certain PowerPoints, as it were, that you share with people. So I'd like us to deal with how can you grow from fear? In other words, there are specific steps or specific things you have to avoid for you to be able to grow from fear. Can you share with the viewer what those are?
Key to conquering fear, first of all, is be aware what you're going through. That is the most critical thing. Build self-awareness. Once you build self-awareness, be introspective and analyze what are the issues that you're really fearful of. This will paint a picture that really creates what is perceived, what is real. And therefore, you are defining markers through which you can actually approach in terms of building strategies moving forward. So those are the key pivotal things.
And one of the things you said is that you must be aware, you must not fixate.
Exactly.
Can you tell us what is this fixating and why it's important to be aware?
Being aware it helps you first to ground yourself and define the moment you are facing. Fixating means being aware and living and dwelling in it without action. It's almost debilitating. So you find yourself seemingly stuck. So awareness breeds opportunity. I think they call it the art of the possible. Now that you have diagnosed what you're going through, what is it that you can actually do to get out of the situation or use the situation as a stepping stone into the next reality? Okay.
The other point you've made to me when we were prepping is that you say one must practice mindfulness. And I'd like you to give practical examples so that the listener can take something and really apply it to their lives. Can you give a situation, maybe of cases you've dealt with, without necessarily mentioning names, where practicing mindfulness made a difference? First, explain what that means, and then give an example.
Mindfulness really is a simple technique where you pause for a moment and then look back at what activities you've been doing. What were your emotional upswings? What were you discovering about yourself? So a reflective moment where you pause and say, my day started at 7. What activities have added and taken away from me, have energized me, and have actually given opportunities for growth? So mindfulness speaks about deliberate pause. Once you have paused, you are able to see how your life has unfolded in the past. This is where they call the power of humans is having what do you call it? The power of hindsight, so to speak. So being mindful is pausing at the moment and actually understanding the situation and how you are evolving around it.
It's like exercising the power of now that Eckhart Tolle talked about.
Precisely.
Okay. But I want us to unpack it a bit more, because you go further and say that fear is healthy. So that one, I'm going to insist that you point examples of where fear has actually been healthy.
I'll talk about an instance, for example, where I dealt with a coachee in my profession, where they were dealing with a tumultuous situation. But the same token, they wanted to take a step out of the situation. For example, they wanted to prepare themselves for an interview. So all of a sudden, the faculties shot up and saying, I'm not enough. I can't do this. Why me? So their whirlwind just
Is he sort of having butterflies in the belly just before the interview?
Not even just butterflies. That was just adding to the whole picture. So there was, I'm not enough. Why am I bothering with this? So a whole lot of stuff was happening, and then the coachee called me and says, "Coach, this is what I'm actually experiencing." And I said, "Look, let's center ourselves. Acknowledge that you are fearful. That's the first thing. Once you have acknowledged it, then let's answer a simple question. What are you afraid of? What are you fearful of? What do you feel you are incapable of?" All of a sudden, that centered process brought her back to the situation and says, "Wait a minute. This is really in my mind," in a sense. That's the whole idea. The ability to pause and step back for a bit and then embrace the moment. Dwell in the fear that you are experiencing, and then pull it apart and actually identify areas that are creating this perception that there is an impossible thing ahead of you. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I've heard it said that you mustn't overcome fear by targeting fear. To me, that sounds a little counterintuitive. I would have thought that you want to remove the thing that you fear or confront it. But you say, no, don't target fear.
Don't target fear.
Yes.
Rather, focus on it, grow through it, but don't look for it.
So that's difficult to explain. You need to break it down for us. Difficult to grasp.
Yes. For example, as they say, fear then creates a moment of flight or face the fight. So when you target fear, it's almost being deliberate, but you can never target fear in the sense that it needs to be defined. It needs to reveal itself in your mind in terms of what is actually happening at the moment and what you are experiencing at the moment. So the targeting part becomes a bit, as you put it, counterintuitive. You see.
Okay, let's just use a practical example, if we may. Most entrepreneurs have, local entrepreneurs have just been told that SIDA has relaxed its regulations. Bring in and submit your application.
Right.
And I can imagine an entrepreneur thinking, filling all these forms, sharing my ideas, they're going to be passed on to somebody else. On top of that, there'll be tele. On top of that, there'll be postponement after postponement. On top of that, at the end of the day, they'll say, my idea is not worth it. How does an entrepreneur, in that practical example, overcome the fear and submit that application and actually push it through?
The anchor point is always defined as, why do you feel incapable? That's the first, building awareness. Finding a restitute place and saying, am I not capable of putting together a business plan that would sell? Who can I find to actually add value to this process? 2, what are the other things that I feel I'm incapable of doing? Even if my idea is solid enough to be bought into, then that's not the issue. Then what else do I need to actually anchor on and clarify?
Okay. And you say you must even explain why you have that fear. In other words, it's like self-diagnosis. It's almost like psychoanalysis.
Introspection is the word that I would use. Where you're saying, why is this emotion shooting up and saying it's not possible? What am I doubtful of about myself? And what situation is playing out in my mind that is creating this almost sense of defeat?
So in that light, then what advice would you give that young entrepreneur in terms of overcoming these hurdles, this fear, some of them imaginary, some of them real, and making sure that they submit and push through the idea to fruition?
The key thing is build yourself around people who can provide the support. And as they say,
Yes.
That is a critical and powerful statement where you're saying, as Mogobe, what do I need to do and who do I need to help gather information around this issue? If I've diagnosed myself clearly, areas that I'm incapable of, how do I augment those through others that they can actually get me to the next point? So that will be the strategies that I'll recommend, that somebody look at increasing themselves through people.
Okay, maybe even finding experts who've done it before.
Mentorship. And coaches.
Yes, absolutely.
And who knows, even watching Mogobe's Nuggets.
Oh, absolutely. That could assist. Now, there's a flip side of the coin called faith. Some actually say that it's not necessarily the flip side because sometimes they exist side by side. Faith and fear. But can you define faith and explain how faith what the role of faith in the context of, successful entrepreneurship endeavors?
Faith is this unwavering belief that one has, cannot put a finger to it, cannot be logically proven. That just creates a momentum that something better is just around the corner. And this really sits well with people who are enterprising, because sometimes the idea just springs up and you see it in your head. You believe that it can have an impact on the overall humankind, and you unwaveringly follow suit in terms of that. So it powers and fuels action.
Okay, in fact, you're talking about the Hebrews 11 type of faith, where we're talking about substance of things unseen or evidence of things unseen. I'm paraphrasing.
Precisely.
Is that the sort of faith that you're talking about?
That is the sort of faith that I'm talking about.
Yeah. And how does it help one get through challenging times?
The power of faith is, as they say, tough situations don't last, tough people do. It's just having a mantra that powers you and saying, it's a moment to a process, or a moment in a process that will get me to a higher space. So just that positivity, as they say, as an opposing force to fear, where is negativity. Fear breeds positivity and abundant thinking mindset.
Can you apply this to some of the, the workshops you have or some of the seminars you have, and tell me really how you help people embrace these ideas? How do you, for instance, help someone use their faith to strengthen them in the face of weakness? What sort of modules do you have, and how does it work practically?
There are a couple of modules that we have, and in the 7 habits, the abundance mentality is what is really hinged on faith. That the minute you believe there is more for each of us, all of a sudden, that makes it easy for you to see opportunities. So that positive-minded thinking. But I may want to cite an example where when people go through tough times, their faith is renewed or is deepened. When things are seemingly insurmountable, their faith is refined and they're able to actually find their purpose. So that is the key part that I can think at the top of my head in terms of how faith is renewed. But what I have learned through my coaching sessions with coaches is that when they are in that dark moments, their faith, which is normally religious or spiritual, emerges. And this is how people are able to climb out of a dark hole. Yeah.
Well, I've heard Mandela being credited with a quotation which is very interesting. It says, "It always seems impossible until it's done." How do you apply faith to have that sort of attitude?
Let's connect it to the fear. Always seems impossible. That's fear. Until it's done, that's facing it. So that is the conduits that we actually saying is, if there is a problem in running your business, cash flow, like for example, with the COVID issue, 2 things you can do. You can fold, or you can work through the new normal by creating new strategies, new markets, new customer base, and also reinventing yourself as a business. That is what is the anchor piece of faith. The positive mind that despite the restrictions, despite the hurdles, despite the seemingly impossible moments, this is an opportunity that is presented to me to rise above the crisis.
And you say faith resides in the heart. You are not a heart surgeon. How do you know that?
Some say faith really sits in the heart and the spirit. It's an intangible.
Yes.
Fear is imagined. So you find that faith
meaning that fear resides in the mind.
In the mind, because we
in the
conjure
head,
it up.
In the frontal lobe.
Exactly.
Whereas faith is
hidden in the heart.
Explain that. That's difficult to appreciate at face value.
Let's start with the head. Fear happens in here because it's what we observe, it's what we feel, it's what we think. And normally, fear is done to save us from making mad, silly mistakes. But it also can be debilitating in terms of progress and achieving your goals. But faith, on the other hand, unlocks that doubt. which sits in the heart. And they say a heart always tells the truth.
Mm.
So its residence in the heart really speaks from that in saying, with love and normally signified and connected to the heart, all things are possible. And that's where faith resides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, we shouldn't forget our main overriding concept, which is to talk about personal growth and link it up. For instance, how does faith really contribute to personal growth?
Well, it's the fire that fuels the passion. If in your heart you are not inclined to believe that this will add value to your life, you will not be driven. And it's not about faith, it's about passion. If you're not driven from a point of connectedness, you are not able to actually grow to the extent in which you want to achieve the level of growth that you are pursuing. So passion is fueled by faith.
That's interesting. And one of the phrases that you use is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Precisely.
And the biggest problem for most people is knowing what will kill you and what won't. You assume that everything will kill you. So can you address that for the benefit of the entrepreneur?
For the benefit of the entrepreneur, for example, a pandemic, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And this is the observation. If you have risen and faced the reality, it means you are deploying all resources available to you with the overriding view that we will see the horizon, and that's where faith kicks in. So the fear aspect really gets you to be tactical. The faith aspect gets you to be strategic in saying, I don't know how the world will look like in the next 9 months, but I'll be part of it. And this is how it will come out looking like. And sometimes they always say, you imagine things that seemingly look impossible, where there's a greener, a brighter future despite the dark days, etc.
Well, some of your points that you sent to me sound like it's a pastor preaching, because you're saying faith trumps stress, anxiety, and fear. That is something you'd hear from a pulpit. Isn't it?
Precisely.
Yeah. Can you break that down and see, without being too preachy, and help us understand it?
When you look at fear, anxiety, they all are created in the mind. When we see something, we either register fear or we become anxious of it. But with faith, when you go back from a biblical point, when you go to the source that is above all, it gives you an optimistic view in saying that things will get better, but you have to endure the current tribulations.
Mr. Mosiakgabo, let's apply it to your own personal life story. What role has fear and faith played in your life? And can you give an examples in your life's journey how these things may have impacted, positively or negatively, your journey?
My journey is a very interesting one, and I'm glad you brought it closer to home. The biggest fear I've always had was, can I provide for my family? That has always been the biggest fear. And for a man, that is almost paramount. It's almost your identity. But in answering that question is, what is it that I believe I lack for me to be able to meet that objective or to meet that mission? And then the level of self-awareness and details propel me to start saying, what skills do I need to build now? What competencies are lacking to ensuring that I will move closer to meeting that objective? So it's almost beginning with the end in mind. This is the picture.
Which is one of the 7 pillars.
Seven habits.
7 habits, yes.
Exactly. So in applying the principles, it also always founded that, but where is the foundation that will fuel this intention? I had to get passionate about seeing my family in a different state, doing bigger things, pursuing that dream. So that became something I remained in my mind and saying, this is how I need to actually achieve my objective. So the faith part, this is where when it gets tough, you believe in the higher power. Somebody has created me to thrive. Somebody has given me an opportunity to find my true purpose.
So what tough situations did you encounter?
Loss of my job.
Ooh, tell us about that. Were you fired?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
What had happened was, after 5 years of corporate life and delivering projects that were complex and difficult and emotive, it was my turn to be given a pink slip and saying, we no longer need you.
Not because you're incompetent, because you've rendered yourself irrelevant by being,
irrelevant.
you became too good.
You could say that. You could say that. So I was also made redundant, and I thought, my goodness, I have an objective to fulfill, which is to provide for my family. Now what? But it was the trust in who I am that propelled me to the next stage. But first of all, I had to introspect what the next stage would look like. But fear riddled me in the sense that how would day one look like without a job, without a salary, without meeting my minimum objective to the family? So that was the critical bits.
And somebody might be asking themselves, and in this context, I don't mind telling the viewer that you and I meet quite often at Exclusive Books.
Oh, yes.
So someone might ask themselves, what are the specific tools? How do you actually empower yourself in terms of weaponizing the faith so that you can overcome the fear?
Precisely. The first one is, I know it might be controversial, but I don't intend, it's no point intended. First of all is the belief that there is a greater power and you are created for something.
For a purpose.
A purpose. That's what drives us. 2, reference to scripture normally creates a certain level of semblance in the mind. It calms the mind, so to speak, and it fuels the emotion or the spirit. And then, of course, looking for references, your autobiographies, and those who have actually experienced what you're going through, reference points. And of course, the most old age wisdom, people who have walked the path before.
Yeah.
That is what fuels their faith in saying, if it has happened to somebody and they've managed to come out of this, then there is hope.
From what you're telling me is that your sources are, the books, namely, the 7 Habits, the 8th Habit, and the Bible. Precisely. With 66 books in there. That's your source. Is there any other particular book or biography that has impacted you, that has helped you actually not only internalize these concepts, but actually apply them?
Oh, yes. A very powerful book by Richard Branson called Screw It, Let's Do It.
I've read it.
That book just gets you out of your seat where you think you have seen it, the worst of it all. It propels you to just trust in your own capability. And in there, even the Japanese saying or Chinese saying, it says, build it and they will come. Just believe in the process of reinventing yourself, that the end is in sight. So that was the one pivotal book. And then the other book that I read was Capitalist Nigger.
By, I forgot who it's
the
by.
Nigerian.
Yeah, it's a black book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what really got me going with that book was how I had to see the world and the legacies that I needed to create for me, for my family, and for my community. It had nothing to do with being an N-word, but it had everything to do with how we think. So just planting that seed on elevating my thinking created a momentum to believing that actually things are possible if we start changing how we think.
Now, you say about faith as we continue that it is rooted in the expectations of good things to come. Can you unpack that for us using examples where necessary?
Like the current situation that we're dealing with. COVID. 6 months ago, partners of mine wanted to fold. Literally, they said, look, there is no business. We need to get out and save our skins before we get into a worse off situation. And I said to them, what has changed is how we are responding to the situation or the pandemic. But the business fundamentals still remains intact. We sell, we service, we invoice. That hasn't changed. 2, the other aspect that has really moved off is how the community interacts with each other. But it has not taken away the interaction out. It just puts medium in place on how we can enhance interaction and continue, because life has to continue. So that was the critical part where we say, look, with all things considered, and the horizon in sight, we need to reinvent ourselves to adapt to the situation. So that was the critical turning point for me, in the sense that the partners said, look, we'll give you the reins, push what you see, and we believe you can actually.
Is that around the same time you took over the leadership of the company?
Coincidentally.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they must have seen you knew something. Because I'm reminded of John Maxwell saying, everything rises and falls on leadership. So there's something they must have seen in you, your preparedness to face the hardship at the time. Yes.
And it so happened at the same time that the meaning of fear, I flipped it to say, face everything and rise.
While others are facing everything and running. Yeah.
And believe me, we were able to lock in deals during the crisis moments that people thought we were not able to. We couldn't even have the opportunity to lock in contracts during a crisis time, because we were prepared. We started moving into
the digital space,
so that we can deliver our programs virtually.
Yeah.
But we were doing it with the hope that the market will be receiving or receptive to it, and that happened.
Well, the question that arises is, how do you actually do it so that maybe somebody out there might benefit? How do you move your whole business into online or digital space?
And it's hinging on the sentence that you just said about Maxwell. Leadership rises and falls on,
everything rises and
falls on leadership. The key part is, if you don't step up as a leader to the center against all odds, how do you inspire change? How do you inspire somebody to believe that, wait a minute, this guy is onto something? So it was that mad position where we needed to step into the center stage and face all the barrage of bullets, passiveness, almost a defeatist mentality that we needed to overcome. So as a leader, you had to step into the center and paint a picture. And this is where faith comes in, that we will come out of this stronger. Okay. How that is going to happen, you figure it out in your private quarters.
I think also education plays a role, Mr. Mosiakgabo. Would you mind sharing with the viewer your educational background in terms of what you studied and how some of it is applicable to these issues, especially when we talk about, fueling your personal growth?
Interestingly, people get surprised when I tell them I studied sociology and environmental science.
Is that what your first degree is on?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But for me, the wisdom that I derived was, everything happens in the environment, but sociology speaks about society as it evolves. So human behavior became a critical and a very curious space for me, in terms of how communities are created and how individuals are treated within a community, and how the environment even today plays a counterintuitive position in how we live. So that is my background. But I became a student of life by learning through work. My journey started out as a learning and development officer, grew my way into organizational development and talent manager, and then became a talent advisor, became a management consultant, and then now I'm running a business that I've got vested interest in. So that has been my journey. But along the way, reading had remained a pivotal and a key hook that I relied on.
I really want you to emphasize that, because I noticed that everybody's attention has shifted to the small space of their phone, and reading has become a bit secondary,
Yes.
What would you do to encourage, especially the entrepreneurs? Because speaking for myself, I read that most CEOs of successful Fortune 500 companies read 52 books a year.
Yes.
Which means one book a week.
Precisely.
What can you do, you and I collectively, help me spread this gospel, make people understand that they have to fuel their own minds and improve themselves? You've seen it firsthand as a coach, as a trainer. Yes. I want you to help me evangelize a little bit more on this point, if you know what I mean.
at Franklin Covey, we always say, meet the client where they are. Currently, as an entrepreneur, we often feel that reading is rudimentary. But right now, multiplicity of sources exist. Nuggets like this sort of show, it will take you 20 minutes to actually absorb a program. But also there are mentors that are willing to share insights, wisdom of how they've conquered fear and how they've built faith around their businesses. So that information is available all over the place. But nothing substitutes an old age book where you need to, even if it means reading a page,
yes,
just reading a page,
yeah,
and then building it up. Because oftentimes we always claim that we don't have time to read, but we've got plenty of time to pause and then read for 15 minutes. That is how I build a habit.
There's an unkind joke that if you want to hide something from a black man, you put it in a book. That, I think, is slanderous and is not fair on us. But I want you to help me debunk this concept.
You know, I once read a story where a mother hid money in a Bible for her son. And the son moved from home. And then month 1 went, month 2 went, and month 3, the guy ran out of money. And then he called his mother, and then his mother said, open the Bible. And he says, Mom, I've been reading the Bible. He says,
since I was a kid.
Well, once you've opened the Bible, you wouldn't have this problem. It took him 3 months. Eventually, when he opened the Bible, he found a stack of money in the Bible. So it really depends on where the myth sits. I wouldn't want to speak for a kind of people.
Yeah, or
but
a race.
I think generally, non-reading or not developing the habit, it's a habit that one has to develop, regardless of culture, regardless of background. Because through society, that's where information is kept. That's where continuous and cultural sharing and transmission happens through books. And it's been researched that when you read the word, it has a different impact than when you are a visual learner. So it really becomes a touch and go subject, in the sense that it works for other people who are visual learners. It doesn't work for other people who are not. But at the end of the day, written word seems to have more impact.
Okay. Mr. Mosiakgabo, I've introduced a new idea to this show. And you are the first one to get an opportunity. The idea is that as we come to the conclusion, you ask me as Mogobe, as a host, one question.
Oh,
and then
perfect.
I get to answer that question. It's a new concept. I'm going to try it with you. From now on, I give people an opportunity to ask me one question as we conclude the interview.
Okay.
Any question. Of course, if it's too sensitive, I'll say try another one. Go ahead.
I think for me, the one question that stood out was, what is your greatest fear?
Okay. Given the definition of fear being false evidence appearing real, I'd like to think that I fear nothing. But obviously, if there's a lion and he's coming my direction,
yes,
I'm going to run or I'm going to find strategies of getting away from it. So my answer is that I don't have anything specific to fear. I've had to confront death a few times in my life, and I've come to accept that death itself is part of life. So if you do not fear death, it doesn't mean I'm going to be reckless and be throwing myself off the roof of buildings or anything like that.
Right.
But it does mean that I've accepted that death itself is like life. It's part of it. So having overcome this fear, I can safely say I have nothing to fear but fear itself.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. With those remarks, now we come to the conclusion of our part together. You have an opportunity now to look at the camera and face the camera and say something by way of a takeaway message, by way of a powerful nugget that you can leave the viewer with.
Great. Well, to the viewers at home, I think what my parting message would be, face everything and rise, because that's where you experience the ultimate growth. Whenever you are challenged, reach out for somebody who has gone the mile, find a mentor, find a coach, and this could actually be a turning point in your life. But fear definitely is healthy. But faith is the cure.
Amen. That's a very powerful message. How do people reach you? Do you want to share your contact details with the viewer?
Great. I'm reachable via email at the moment because of the social distancing situation at max@franklincovi.co.bw or max@hrodafrica.co.com.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for what you've shared. It's been very impactful.
Thank you
And
for
I hope
hosting
someone
me.
has benefited as a result of it.
Let's hope
The next
so.
time we invite you to go deeper on other aspects of personal development, please accept our invitation.
I shall.
And to you, the viewer, please don't forget to subscribe to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. You can also say it.
Please.
Yeah.
It's a resource, invaluable. Let it be part of your podcast list.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
All right.